content, views, and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the producer and do not necessarily reflect the view and opinions of the City of Bremerton, BCAT, their officials, or their employees.
Willkommen! Welcome to Gardening Through Art. I'm Elise of Joyful Plant. I help artists craft sustaining brands with my Gardening Through Art method. Let's begin. Norwegians of recent centuries have discovered the art of Rosemaling, or flower painting, to decorate everyday items for happiness. Trunks from other places in the world arrived on ships when people immigrated, and they learned designs to elevate the traditional acanthus carving to begin to paint. Rosemalers would move around the country, living in homes and painting them for a family. Now, everyone with access to fine oil paints and a steady hand can practice C-strokes, S-strokes, and the traditional colors of bliss. While Norway's valleys are divided into different styles, each Rosemaling artist has their unique painting style. To follow along at home, you'll need an oil paint set, including paint thinner and oil, palette knife, a flat brush, number 4 or number 6, and a small round brush. Many artists use patterns and transfer paper to copy the pattern to the piece. Traditionally, we use a painted piece of wood, like a plate, with a traditional Rosemaling background, like an Aegean blue, rust, black, or cream background paint. Here's how we do it. This is an example of a completed piece of Telemark Norwegian Rosemaling. First, we create a background paint layer, and then oftentimes Rosemalers use a pattern to transfer the design that was created by somebody else onto the piece. And there are very specific composition consistencies. As you can see, it comes around in a C-stroke, and there are swirls. It uses the golden spiral of the Fibonacci sequence with a 2/3 design. There's a root to the design, and almost everything is pointing toward the root, except if there is another flower, and then they are pointing toward the center of the flower. We use variation in color, and usually one side is darker and the other side is lighter. There's also some variation in the brush strokes, and we try to be very careful practicing our brush strokes in our C strokes and S strokes, as well as a few teardrops. There are 2 different main layers of this stage. We have the background paint and then the detail. The background paint is done with the flat brush, and the detail is done with a small round brush or a quill. And when it is completely dry, we can put a finishing layer to coat and protect it. This is very special and something that can be passed down through generations. I do have a plate from one of my ancestors. In order to create our oil palette, we will mix very specific colors. We have a burnt umber. Prussian blue mixed with burnt umber creates the typical blue. Then we have a yellow ochre and alizarin crimson to create a kind of a red, a warmer red hue. And then we have a mix of the Prussian blue, burnt umber, and yellow ochre to create our green. And then we have a few gold varieties. This one is just yellow ochre by itself, and then we'll create a nice putty color. Actually, I'll save a little bit of that burnt umber. We mix 50% Prussian blue with burnt umber. You can learn how to do Rosemaling on your own, or Western Rosemalers has lots of classes, especially by a woman named Marilyn Hansen. It's on the east side, but often comes over to the west side to deliver goods that she paints to the Nordiska store. Oftentimes she will create classes for people to begin Rosemaling. Sometimes they're at the PLU Scandinavian Cultural Center. So we mash it straight down, and when we can kind of test this blue. We don't want it to be a stark blue, but mixed. Different types of Rosemaling can have various colors. So if you are going for a Swedish style Rosemaling, you might have more of a stark blue, but in this case, we want it nice and brown. Might even add that back in. Any size palette knife works. So you can mix your own colors, and when you get a set of oil paints from the art store, they generally keep for a very long time. This is starting to be a nice Norwegian blue. You can take most of that off and create more of a medium blue. And mash those together until you achieve your desired saturation of color. It's okay to have some variety in this, and it's okay for it to turn out a little bit differently than your mentor might have it. I'm going to make a third blue here with this rest of the titanium white in order to select quite the right blues. Okay, we can clean off our palette knife and look toward a little bit of a red. We will add a little bit of the burnt umber and alizarin crimson to create a deep red. We use somewhat of subdued colors, so if you are painting and you don't need to clean off your brush entirely, you can let them kind of blend together. It creates a little more of a subdued look, which is more traditional to the Norwegian style. And some of these colors can vary depending on the supplies or the name brand. And it's okay to create your own style as well. The way that we can keep traditions going is to have some room for it to adapt to modern times and new interpretations. But involvement in something like the Western Rosemalers Association is a great way to stay active and continue learning. Our lightest red is more like a salmon. And you can see it's not stark red anymore, just as we also don't use the stark white. Okay. As always with oil paints, make sure you have a well-ventilated area so that you're not breathing anything, although I think they have adapted the recipes so that they are easier for people to be around. These paints are the M. Graham from a studio in Portland. You can get high-quality artist paints at Artists and Craftsman Supply, sometimes the Artist Edge, or you can order them directly from the manufacturer. It's nice when that's a local company. So for this green, I'm blending the Prussian blue and burnt umber to make our Norwegian blue. And I'll add just a small amount with the yellow ochre to get a medium green. And it's okay for your palette to look messy. You can scrape that off and make a lighter green with the rest of this yellow ochre. It can be very satisfying just to mix the colors and see how they come together and create very specific traditional colors. Then this gold is okay to leave just as it is. I might take a little bit of that burnt umber and blend it with the yellow ochre to make a darker gold. Our final lighter color is going to be what we call a putty. And so that's mostly titanium white with just a small amount of yellow ochre. I've reserved a couple smudges of white just in case we need to make any of them a little bit lighter to give it 3 gradients. And a little bit goes a long way. This is really a lot of paint. I think that's a nice amount for the putty. So we have our main palette here. I also have a little bit of this, in this case, walnut oil. We don't use the linseed oil as much. And also I transfer my paint thinner into a smaller container, so that's easier to use. So we can use a flat brush. We might dip a little bit into some of the oil. You can use a cloth or a towel. We can begin to consider the painting that we will do. I like to start with the deep blue. And again, a little goes a long way. So with a little bit of oil on the brush, it picks up quite a bit of pigment. And we can brace our hand. And really, this is a lot about steadiness. So sometimes we might use a riser for our wrist. We start to go into a C stroke and pull it in toward the center and let it come up. I can see that's quite a bit of oil. So for my next one with the blue, I'll clean off the brush just slightly, bring another C stroke next to it, and we'll come in and blend. Many of the Rosemalers are active in their elder years. So there are lots of people to learn from that have been doing this for 30, 40, maybe more years. Lois Clausen is another Bremerton artist that has been very active in teaching Rosemaling in the Paulsbo area, as well as Bremerton. So depending on your skill level, you might be able to blend very well, as well as the quality of your brushes. So we're just using basic C strokes, and it's okay for it to not look as neat as you want it to in the end. Oil paint does end up being very forgiving. And you can clean up mistakes with a Q-tip and a little bit of paint thinner. We try to use odorless paint thinner so we're not breathing it. You can choose which side has the lighter side of art. It doesn't always have to be the side toward the light, since we're using fantasy flowers in telemark style. You have some liberties in deciding where they go. But as you can see, it starts to blend over this red petal, and that's okay because we can fix that with the detailing. We won't need the paint thinner very often, but sometimes switching from blue to a lighter shade such as yellow, you can get some more blending than you might desire. If you choose, you might have something like a Lazy Susan to spin the design around, or some people hold their work in their hand while they paint it. As far as obtaining wooden supplies goes, there is a magnificent woodworker that lives in Port Orchard named Bill Keller, and he creates a lot of tinas, bent wood boxes, as well as other mostly Scandinavian designs. So once we have most of this initial piece in the center painted, we can create a little bit of a flower center. So I like to use this burnt umber and create 2 C strokes. And the second one might just have a tiny bit of putty on the top so that we can see the top of the flower. For our detailing, we use a nice long brush, and we can usually use a putty or a blue to do the details. So we create a specific detail based on the type of color we're using. So with this yellow one, I'm going to detail it up here. And use the golden spiral to create the ideal size, dimension. So we paint everyday objects, especially wooden ones, around the house to bring us joy, especially in more of a gloomy time of year. We don't have to succumb to the gloom. We can enjoy our homes. And this is a great way to put a little bit of fun into everyday objects. The blue especially can get everywhere. There's a lot of pigment in the Prussian blue, so it can be quite challenging to refresh your brush after this one. Some artists might choose to use different brushes for each color. So we bring it around, we can make little swirls. You can create little designs. Sometimes there is one single net in the detail strokes. Needs a little more oil. We don't want to add too much oil to the paint or it becomes challenging to dry, but the detail layer needs some for fluidity, so finding the right viscosity for your style can help a lot. And don't be discouraged if your Rosemaling is not up to par. Just keep practicing. I can tell that I need some more practice. So it's good that we're doing that. Sometimes people choose one word to write in a traditional script. I have one by my door that was done by Marilyn Hansen that says "Ufta," which is the way Scandinavians tend to say when they've had enough. So a lot of the Norwegian designs are probably adapted from trunks coming from Asia. So originally the Rosemalers were carving the acanthus vine, and they started seeing a lot of decorations coming in on trunks and decided to paint instead of carve. There are lots of things that we can do that increase our joy, happiness. And even with moments of challenge, it can still be worthwhile. And even if you're not as skilled at this as you might like to be, practicing it is a very good thing. So here's the end. If you wanted to create kind of a fun effect, if you didn't like the brush, you can get just a little dot and create uniform dot sizes to pronounce the outer part of the lip of the flower. And you can look at the piece and decide if that feels like enough, and we don't want to overwork it. So I think for this one, it feels like enough. Norwegian Rosemaling is more than just a decorative art form. It's a celebration of beauty and tradition that brings joy and happiness into our lives. By incorporating these vibrant, flowing designs into everyday objects, Rosemaling brightens our surroundings and lifts our spirits, connecting us to our cultural heritage and the simple pleasures of life. I hope you enjoyed Rosemaling and learned something new. Thank you for watching Gardening Through Art. Please visit joyfulplant.com for more activities and resources. Takk skal du ha!